This meeting is being recorded, so I'll start recording it now, just as a heads up. The materials are available at tinyurl.com/cpc/SWIS. We are in the advanced SWIS PowerPoint. There's a couple in there because I wanted to give you a resource, so just know that. And we'll go ahead and start. I'll post the materials again in the chat. You have to copy and paste those. We are here for an hour. I have way too much content, so we're going to go fast and we won't get done with all of it. But I've provided a hyperdoc, which I'll show you here in a few seconds, that I think will be helpful for you. Just going to note that we are recording. So this webinar is brought to you in part by the California PBIS Coalition. The coalition is a collaborative organization using evidence-based, culturally relevant practices to build the capacity of all stakeholders in the implementation of PBIS as a multi-tiered system. And we do follow the national PBIS blueprints in doing that work. So essentially, we are a network of folks throughout California, county offices, school districts, nonprofits, all supporting this PBIS work together. I am Luke Anderson. I'm the Senior Director of Prevention, Supports, and Services for Placer County Office of Education. Put our website there, and also my email and Twitter handle that we use at Placer. So I am a part of two PBIS teams. One is the Placer PBIS team, so you can see that group right there. I am the tall one in that photo. And then I'm also a member of the California PBIS Coalition, and both groups like to take pictures with giant PBIS letters. And in my spare time right now, I am also running a preschool because my children do not go to daycare, which is going swimmingly, as you can see from the picture of my two boys. They're actually doing pretty well for the most part. Zoom, feel free to have your camera on. It's nice just to be able to see each other, especially right now while we're all social distancing. I will mute everybody. You do have the capability of unmuting yourself, but we got quite a few folks on, so it's probably best to use the chat, but just know that you do have that capability. You can raise your hands, again, use the chat box, and I think you can even interact with the presenter, so feel free to do that as well. All right, so we're gonna do a quick chat practice. I wanna make sure everybody can use the chat feature. So what I'd like you to do is just think for a second on a scale from 1 to 5, 1 meaning I'm brand new to SWIS, 5 meaning I feel pretty darn good. Luke, give me control of the Zoom. I will take over from here. How are you feeling? So just go ahead and punch in a number and I'll just watch. I think Ashley's feeling pretty confident. Ada's feeling pretty confident. All right, so we've got a mix. It's like a good solid group. And nice. All right, so today's presentation, it is we're calling it an advanced SWIS webinar. So I'll talk a little bit about what we're going to go into. It may be a little quick for folks if you're brand new to SWIS, but I've included some links to some videos that can help bridge the gap after the fact if you need it. The other thing to know is we're going to be in the PowerPoint for a few minutes here, and then I'm going to get us out, and we'll spend most of our webinar in the SWIS application. And then I've got a document that I'll be kind of walking you through that we can do some responding in the chat with. So that's going to be kind of how we're going to roll through this day, if you will. All right, so here's our objectives. We're going to do a little bit of background on discipline disproportionality. I do want you by the end of our session to be able to run and communicate what the SWIS ethnicity reports are, and also utilize the suspension report and the student dashboard report. And ideally run advanced drill down reports. That's probably a little bit more than we'll be able to get done in an hour. We'll see how it goes. All right, so materials. So tinyurl.com/CPC SWIS. Post it one more time there. If you're following along on the PowerPoint, this hyperdoc here is linked, but I'm going to come out of that and figure out how to move my thing there. Okay, so in the folder, when you follow the URL, the advanced SWIS for CPC is the PowerPoint we're using. And then this PCOE advanced SWIS users Google Doc is the document we're going to be using. So what I would recommend if I were you is to make a copy of it. So to do that, follow that tiny URL. It's going to bring you to here. Double click on PCOE advanced SWIS users. When it comes up, then you're going to hit file and make a copy. And that will allow you to type in the document or to save it if you want. If you don't do that right now, you can always make a copy later because the responding that we're going to do is going to be in the chat. So don't worry too much about that. But I'll give you a second to do that. While you're working on that, I'll show you one more time how to get there. So you're going to go to the link that's in the chat. You're going to copy that link and paste it into your web browser. That is going to bring you to this screen. Then you are going to double click on this document, PCOE Advanced SWIS Users. It will bring up this document and you will select File and make a copy. Again, if you're new to Google, don't worry about it. Everything that we're going to do is going to be pretty straightforward. I'm going to do a quick intro to this document because it's going to be helpful as we're going through the day here. This is just a hyperdoc. Essentially, it's a document that has a good number of hyperlinks on it to useful resources. And then there's going to be some questions that we'll be answering. I've used this document for some longer sessions in the past, so I've highlighted a few of the questions that we'll be focusing on today. So just know that. So if you're in here, there's a link to the SWIS Users Manual. I also have a link to a process map from a school that is using SWIS for blended learning. So if you're interested in that, you can have it. I've got a few resources on person import. We're not going to have a chance to do those today, but what we will do today is look at the SWIS ethnicity reports and know that all of these links here are to videos from the PBIS apps website, and they are about 5 minutes long, and they overview these 4 reports that we're going to go over today. Then there is a link to, again, the SWIS Users Manual. We'll talk a little bit about the suspension report today, and you can get to that here. If you scroll down, there's some of the questions and the prompts that we'll be looking at today. Again, we'll respond in the chat and use that as we go. All right, so if you're feeling like you're good, you got Google semi figured out here, go ahead and type all good into the chat. If you need 1 more minute, just type 1 minute and then I will give it to you. Go ahead. All right, Google fluent folks. All right, I'm moving on. You guys are ready. Okay. So that is that document. Just wanted to give some shout outs. A lot of the content I'm going to be providing is from the PBIS apps team at the University of Oregon. Got some slides from Bert Elizen from the University of Oregon, some from Kent from U of O. And then the resource that I linked in there is from Kim Wood and Andy Wood from PCOE. So you can see these folks' pictures here too. There's Bert, there's Kim, there's Kent, and I didn't have a picture of Andy, sorry. One more thing, as we're talking, we're going to begin our talk today about discipline disproportionality. One of the resources I wanted to give you, if you're following along with the PowerPoint, is a link to an article written by Kim Wood, who I just showed you, on how one school in Placer County PCOE eye care pathways addressed their discipline disproportionality. So it's kind of on the bottom there. It's small. I apologize for that, but it's a great article for later on when you have some time during your social distancing to read here. Pretty cool article. So thinking about those objectives, we're going to start with talking about this discipline disproportionality, which usually begins with the conversation around equity. One of the things that I've learned is right now it's helpful to frame this conversation pretty clearly initially. So let's just define it. What are we talking about when we talk about equity? We often use this term, the fair access, treatment, opportunity, and advancement for all people. So our goal is really to make schools accessible places for everyone. So usually when this conversation comes up, you'll see these baseball fence analogies. So usually it starts with this idea of equality versus equity. Equality may be giving everybody the same thing, and equity may initially be thought of as distributing our resources to level the playing field. Of course, this is incomplete. So I've had some folks say, yes, but those boxes are not accessible. So we could, of course, think about it too from more of a UDL perspective and say we need to make sure our supports are accessible to everyone. And again, this I think is a better treatment of the topic, but still incomplete. Going a little bit deeper, and when we start talking about equity with respect to race and ethnicity, we also have to acknowledge that the fence is actually different for different groups of students. And I think it's helpful to think about the fence as really being the school system. So the school system's just been set up to benefit some students above others. So when we're distributing our resources, we need to think about not only our student needs, but the historical needs of particular student groups. And really our goal is, of course, to remove those barriers. So that's kind of that frame around equity as we're looking at some discipline data here in a minute. All right, so we'll talk about suspensions in particular and discipline differences when we get into the SWIS ethnicity reports. One thing that's important to keep in mind is why this matters so much. So we just got a little blurb here from an article, and it's pointing out some research conducted by folks, Balfans and colleagues from Johns Hopkins University. And they did the research in Florida. And what they found was if a student was suspended one time in 9th grade, that student had a double the chance of dropping out of high school compared to the students that weren't suspended. So if you're suspended one time in 9th grade, you are twice as likely to drop out of high school. Also, I think alarming, being suspended twice in 9th grade is a better predictor of dropout than failing 2 classes. So real serious stuff here. So you might think about it like this. If you're suspended, you're more likely to drop out. And then if you drop out of high school, you are more likely to experience a host of negative life outcomes. So suspension does matter. It is harmful. And we need to make sure that we are not contributing to inequality in our society through the misapplication of suspension. When we talk about that, generally get some questions on, well, where does that come from? Where does it not come from? It does not come solely from poverty. So we can control for poverty, and we know that that is not the single determinant of discipline disproportionality. In fact, when we control for that, we still see significant differences in the rates that students are suspended from school based on their race and ethnicity. So We also know that behavior itself actually does not play a big contributing factor. So it's not that one race or ethnicity is engaging in more dangerous or more high-level behaviors. In fact, most of the discipline disproportionality we see is from behaviors like disruption and defiance, not from those high-level ones. All right, so in SWIS, we're going to look at those, how we might measure this thing called discipline disproportionality. There's 4 reports. One's called the Referral Risk Index, one is called Referral Risk Ratio, one is the students with referrals by ethnicity, and one is the referrals by ethnicity. So we're going to start here with this basic idea of problem identification. So before we can move to address any of these issues, we just need to know first and foremost, do we have a problem? So we are going to go ahead and log into SWIS, and I'm going to encourage you to log in with me, and I'll show you how to get there. So we're going to go to pbisapps.org, and I'll type that into our chat. And once you are there, I'll give you a second to get there. You are going to go into the app demo, and give you one more second to kind of catch up here. And to do that, once you've got pbisapps.org open up in this little micro font up here at the top, it says apps demo. I'm going to have you click on that. If for some reason you can't access it, that's okay. I'm going to demonstrate everything, but some folks like to follow along as well. Once you've selected apps demo, you're going to select SWIS, check in, check out SWIS, iSWIS demo, this first big orange button here. Once you do that, it is going to log you into the demo account, which takes about a second. All right, and again, it's pbisapps.org, apps demo, and then I selected the SWIS, check and check out SWIS, iSWIS, log in there. All right, good. So to identify some of these less used reports, one of the place we're going to go is to the View Reports tab here. So what I want you to do is go ahead and select that, or if you're following along, that's fine as well. And then I've selected that. And I'll show you one more time. So I was here at the dashboard. I selected View Reports. And we are going to select the Ethnicity Report tab. We're getting close to our first activity here, so just know that. All right, so this is where the 4 SWIS ethnicity reports are. We are going to talk first about this first one, Referral Risk Index. So neat thing here in SWIS is there are 3 tabs here. One is the chart, one is the data table, and one is info. So if you're in here and you forget, hey, what does that report do? You can select info and it will tell you. So the risk index is the proportion of a group that has experienced, in this case, a referral. So if we look at the data table here, I will look at my Latino students for my school. There are 100 Latino students enrolled in this school, and 37% of those students have received a referral. So they have a 37% chance of having a referral, or you could say 37% of the Latino students in the school have a referral. The other way I think about this is if I were to select any random Latino student at the school, that student would have a 37% chance of being suspended. All right, so it's accounting for the amount of enrollment. So when we look at the graph here, we can see, again, our Latino students have a about a 37% chance of having had a referral. And our white students are slightly less than that. And in this school, our Black students are slightly more than that. So again, look at the table, you can see the differences there. We would expect, okay, we would expect across the school that 25%, if 25% of the white students had received a referral, we would expect that 25% of the Black students, 25% of the Latino students have received a referral as well. So it kind of accounts for that difference. So what I want you to do in our SWIS users hyperdoc, if you scroll down a little bit, I've got this first prompt here, and it says, in your own words, describe what the referral risk index measures. So I want you to think about that. Don't post anything in the chat yet. I'll hold up our definition from SWIS folks, and they say it reports or displays the proportion of referred students within each race or ethnicity group. Okay. And then the question we might ask is, what is the risk for a student within each group to receive a referral? What I want you to do is think about, all right, if somebody asked me, what is the referral risk index? How would I describe that? Give me some time on that. And I'm going to ask you to be brave and go ahead and start typing that into the chat. Go ahead. I'll post a question in the chat too. All right, Karen is responding. Thanks, Karen. All right, Jen Baker. Hey, Jen. Based on their ethnicity alone, what is the likelihood that a student will get an office discipline referral? Right, that's on the right track here. The likelihood that a student will receive a referral based on ethnicity. Funded. I'll just give you a couple more seconds there. Yep, David, good catch on that. All right, I'll give you a few more seconds to type. All right, so some good catches here. In SWIS, in this report that we're in, it is measuring just referrals, not suspensions. I will show you later how we can look at suspensions. All right, I'm going to do another question in here. This is historical data. That's right. Good job pointing that out, Susie. So these are the data to date. So when you look at this early in the year, data could be a little bit sketchy. You want to give it a little time. All right, next question. Based on this report, what percentage of Latino students have at least one referral? All right, what percentage of Latino students have at least one referral? I'll pull it back up, and I'll make this a little bit bigger because you're probably looking at it on a tiny screen here. And go ahead and type that into the chat. What percentage of Latino students at this school have at least one referral? All right, 37, right? So 37% of Latino students have at least one referral. From first glance, it looks like that is slightly more than the white student group and the Native student group, clearly less than the Black student group, clearly more than the Asian student group. So we're looking like it's possible that we're seeing some differences here for our Asian students. All right, we good? All right, that is the first one. So again, you got your info, you've got your data table, you got your graph. The referral risk index tells us the proportion of any group that has received, in this case, a referral. You can, cool little SWIS trick over here on the left, you can do show values on the graph. And then you have to hit generate, and then you get your numbers too, which I think is kind of nice. So again, I clicked over here, show values on the graph, hit generate, and I can quickly pull that report up. And you can, of course, change your school year and look at just majors or just minors. All right, so that's a good report. So if somebody were to ask you and they say, gosh, I feel like a high percentage of our Black students have received referrals this year. What percentage have? You could go to this report and you could know that right away. This report is very similar to how the dashboard measures discipline disproportionality. So just know that. So they use a little different enrollment number, and they're looking at suspensions, which I will show you how to get later. All right, let's take a look at another one here. The referral risk ratio. So this one's similar, except that it's now going to compare this risk to the other students, right? So earlier we talked about in the risk index, the Latino students had a 37% chance of being referred, right? Or 37% of Latino students have been referred. Now, what I might want to know is that in fact higher or lower than the rest of the students in this school? Are they in fact over referred? It's a little hard to tell from these data, a lot of variability there. So what the risk ratio is going to do, it is going to compare one group to all other students. So if we look at our graph here, we can compare our Latino students to all other students. And if we look at the data table here, this is how this is done. Again, we'll go to our Latino students. We know that 37% of our Latino students have received a referral. If we compare that to all other students at the school are at risk or have a 36% chance of being referred. So our Latino students have a 37% chance. All other students have a 36% chance. So if we divide those two, we see that, in fact, our Latino students are ever so slightly more likely to be referred, but that's actually pretty close, 1.0. Now, when you look at that, we can see our Black students are over-referred pretty substantially. So 68% of our Black students at this school have been referred at least one time. And we compare that to 32% of the rest of the school that had been referred. So in this instance, at our school, right, all else being equal, these should be the same. And our Black students are almost twice as likely to be referred. Right, you can see that, right? So if 68% of our Black students have been referred and 32% of all other students have been referred, we're seeing some pretty significant differences in how our school is responding. Okay. And again, I see some questions in there. People referring to students play an important role, and it could. But one thing to keep in mind here, again, is we know from our national data that differences in how in discipline are largely a result of the adults at the school. Right? So it's usually largely a result of bias. And that's why we see these big differences in things like defiance and disruption. We don't tend to see them in other behaviors that are more discrete or more concrete. So again, when we're seeing these differences, what we're really thinking about is Not that there's necessarily a big difference in the problem behavior from two groups, but that there may be a difference in how folks are responding to problem behavior. And our goal, regardless, is we should not see those differences. If we know that a suspension or an office discipline referral can lead to bad outcomes, we as the adults need to do what we can to eliminate those differences. And we can talk a little bit about some ways we might find out a little bit more info there. So anytime a group has a risk ratio over 1, that indicates overrepresentation. Anytime it's under 1, we would see some underrepresentation. So in the graph, you can kind of see that. So most groups are either at or below 1. And for this particular sample school here, it appears that essentially all of the discipline disproportionality is around their Black students. Okay. So that's what their data is showing them. So they need to do something different. All right, I'm going to have you go back. Some of these we already answered. So I'll go ahead and do, let's do B here. How much more likely at this school are Black students to receive a referral than all other student groups? And I'll answer some questions here as we go here. All right. And Jenny noted, yeah, so if you only have 2 different race and ethnicity groups at a school, you would just see the 2 different bars. And then Angela, yes, the people referring would play an important factor. That's kind of what we're trying to address. And right now, what we're looking at for both of these charts is a student can only be counted once, right? So you might say, you get into a meeting and somebody says, yeah, I see that we have this disproportionality for our Black students, but we have that one kid that got 10 referrals. In these reports, it's actually just counting the students with referrals, not the total referrals. So it doesn't matter if you have 1 referral or you have 10, once you got 1, you're counted. Similar to how it's done on the dashboard. All right. Angela's asking what in this year people are referring to students. In this case, these data are actually not real data. So they are taken to be illustrative, but that could be an important question. One of the things we do know is the race and ethnicity of the teaching population at a school can affect disproportionality rates. Okay, so I posed our question, how much more likely are Black students in this instance to receive a referral? And we would say twice as likely. Yeah. Raphael, thanks for the visual representation there. Okay, so we've got 2 different measures. Risk ratio is a little bit tricky, but it's a good one to know because it tells you right away how you're doing. Okay. Thanks, Karen, for your comment. Yeah, we do see that some schools, one of the things as Karen made a comment about schools being segregated, and so we see some schools that are significantly one race or another, so much more so than we would expect by the makeup of a state or a locality. So in those instances, these charts are not necessarily going to be helpful. All right, I'm going to do 2 more real quick, and then I want us to do a few more kind of cool things here in SWIS besides these, which are great. 2 more charts. They look very similar. One is called Students with Referrals by Ethnicity. One is called Referrals by Ethnicity. So let's tackle this one first here. This chart, Students with Referrals by Ethnicity. What we're looking at here these green bars, another cool thing in SWIS is if you click on a chart, it gets bigger. The green bars represent the percentage of overall enrollment that a race or ethnicity group represents. So in our sample school, again, these are big data, 60% of the enrolled students are white is what that tells us there. And so we think about that. So if we were to go and grab a big slice, 60% of the students, and we said, all right, 60% of our students, they're white. We would expect if we were to go and take a big grab of the students with referrals, that it would be that 60% of the students with referrals would also be white, right? So if 60% of our enrollment is white, we would expect that 60% of our students with referrals would be white. And in our sample data here, we see that 60% of our students are white and only 54% of our students with referrals have received, or excuse me, are white. All right, pause for a second there. So big idea, we're going to be concerned here whenever we see that the blue bar, the percentage of students with referrals is higher than the green bar. Okay, so our Latino group, pretty similar, 20% of the enrollment, 20% of the students with referrals. And again, we can see for our Black students, they account for 13% of our enrollment, but 24% of our students with referrals. Again, you can look at it in table form here. This also gives you the raw numbers, which can be helpful. So you see some of our groups are pretty small, and we have the info. All right, so we were going to be concerned again when we see that a group represents a smaller proportion of our enrollment than the proportion of students with referrals. All right, here's what I want you to do. Go back to that in the chat. Actually, hold on, before I do that, I'll check our chat here. Jenny, you could comment there. You can partial out to look at what's going on by referrals and drill down. We'll do that next. All right, here's what I want you to do. I want you to use the chat. I want you to just type two numbers. Black students account for blank number of, or excuse me, percentage of our enrollment, and account for blank percentage of the students at the demo school with referrals. I'll go back to our data here. Okay. All right, go ahead and respond. All right, Jackie, Denise went to the table. I can see good precision there. All right, thanks for responding and seeing the responses come in. $13.24. Yeah, so we again, thanks for responding. 13% of our school population is Black. 24% of our students with referrals are Black. We can clearly see that there is some disproportionality there. This tends to be the type of chart that you'll see a lot in reports that are put out, or if a media entity will do a report on a school or a school system. They use this one a lot. I think it's easy for folks to understand. All right, there's another one here, referrals by ethnicity, but I'm actually going to skip it because I want us to have a little bit more time to do a few more things here in SWIS. So what I like to do when I'm in SWIS is, if I get a little lost in SWIS, I click on this blue SWIS icon in the upper left to bring me back to the dashboard here. So again, I just clicked on it right there. All right, so we now know that our Black students are more likely to be referred than all other students at our school. We also know from the national data that that disproportionality is going to be due most likely to differences in referral patterns of the adults, not due to differences in student behavior. So we might say next is, okay, what else do we need to know to be able to intervene on behalf of our students and start to close this gap? So that's where we're going to use our drill down feature here. All right, so back in our HyperDoc here, if we just continue to scroll down, we have this question. It says, what differences are there in the referral patterns for Black and non-Black students? Okay. And I've got, there's a worksheet we can use to do a drill down. It's got some prompts in it. I'm just going to have us do this without the worksheet, just to kind of keep us moving here. But here again, here's our question we're going to ask. So we know that there's differences in the rates of referrals. What I want to know is, are the office discipline referral patterns different for my Black students than they are for all other students? All right, so if I start to see some differences in how and when students are being referred, I might be able to better understand what's happening and address this problem. Does that make sense? Ada's got a question. Is there a way to quickly separate the number of students with multiple suspensions when analyzing this suspension data? Yeah, I think in the suspension report, there it is. All right, I'm gonna go drill down real quick though. All right, so does this make sense where we're gonna go? We are going to identify the who, what, when, where, and why of what's going on here with our discipline disproportionality. So to do that, we're going to go to our drill down feature. We already have our 1920 school year inputted, and then I hit generate. And again, I'll show you one more time how I get here. We're at our SWIS suite. Click on it there. I went to our drill down. We've got the appropriate school year in. We're interested in this school year. I've hit generate. And now we're looking at all the referrals for this whole school. So imagine this is your school site or a school site you serve. And right now, all of these charts, location, grade level, they include every referral that's been written this year. All right. Now, this is helpful, but we may also want to know what the referral patterns are for the group that we want to intervene on behalf of here. And that, again, from our report was, we were interested in knowing the referral patterns for our Black students. So if we wanted to just look at what the referral patterns are, so right now, we've got a big circle. We have all of our students in our data, right? And what I want to know is what the referral patterns are, not for all students, but just for our Black students, to see if we can figure out what's going on here with our referral patterns. So to do that, I would go to demographics, and I would select race and ethnicity, and either double click or you can slide over and drop in any group. Now, right now, you can see these are our referrals by grade for all students. And then when I hit generate, it's going to be just for our Black students in the school. Let's do that. All right, so we see some pretty sharp differences there. So we're saying as a school, we're concerned about this. And if I'm concerned about my Black students being over-referred, receiving too many referrals, and then I'm looking at just their data, and I'm looking at just grade level, I start to see some patterns here. So if just looking at this data, and we'll go a little bit deeper here, looking at the grade level data, what do you notice for our Black students? What grade level is most likely to be referred? You can type it in the chat. Yeah, so 8th grade, right? So 8th grade looks like something's going on there. Okay. Yeah, and there's pretty clear pattern here that Karen's pointing out. That it looks like as students get older, in general, they're getting more referrals. Samantha, good observation. So 8th grade, so they have almost 40 referrals. They're accounting for almost a third of all referrals. That's a pretty significant difference there. So we might say, I just want to look at what's going on in 8th grade, or we might say we're going to frame this as a school-wide problem. Your team would make that determination. Before we look any closer, we may just look at some other variables like location. Okay, so for our Black students, where are most of our referrals coming from? Go ahead and type it in the chat. Susie, is there a way to look at 5 years of historical data to see if there is an issue with the cohort? You cannot, well, you can run these reports and change the school year. So under date time, you could drag in a different school year, but we won't do that right now. But there is a way, yeah, you can run these reports. You can include multiple school years, or you can run them one school year at a time if you wanted to look at those patterns. All right, everybody, it seems like classroom. All right, so again, there's lots of data. We could spend more time on this, but I might want to know what's going on specifically with my African-American students in the classroom. So I had my giant group of data I looked at first, then we focused a little bit and we said, I just want to know what's going on with our Black students. Now what I want to know is, what are the referral patterns just going on for our Black students in the classroom? So to do that, I would go to location and pull in classroom. And when I hit generate, you're going to see it's going to drop all of these other locations, and we're only going to be left with our classroom referrals. And now we see we still have 60 referrals coming from the classroom only for our African American students. My next question might be, we kind of know who are African American students. We know that they're being referred mostly in the classroom. I might want to know problem behavior. And when you look at that, and you can see it looks like defiance and a little bit of inappropriate language. And again, we could look just at defiance and no, here's just the referrals for defiance in the classroom for our African American students. So we could do that. And then we may also ask questions like, we have locations, we have our where, we have our who, we have our what, which is our problem behavior. We might want to know the time of day. So is this happening throughout the whole day? You can see we have a spike in the morning, but we also have some other smaller ones throughout the day. And what I find is, if you know your school, you know what these spikes mean. Fake data, these are totally meaningless. I don't really care if something's happening at 8 o'clock. What I want to know is what routine is happening at 8 o'clock. And then we can generate from there. So that is the process. Once we've kind of narrowed down our time of day, we could, of course, then ask what are staff seeing as the primary motivation for it. That might give us some additional information. But what we see, and I'll just do this quick, normally we'd spend a little more time on this, but for our Black students at this school, we're being over-referred. They're more likely to be referred in the classroom. They're more likely to be referred for defiance. And we know that this is more likely to happen in, let's look at our grade levels. It looks like our middle school grades. So as a group, we might say, as a problem-solving team, we're going to implement an intervention in 6th through 8th grade that is going to support the adults in, number one, how they're responding to a defiance in the classroom. try to reduce some of those referrals and see if we can kind of close some of those gaps. So that's one way to do that in the SWIS drill down feature. All right, we got Susie asks a question here. Can you lay down many school years side by side in the same graph? Not in drill down. You can in some of the more typical reports, like any of the core reports, multiple years. All right, I'm going to go back to drill down here. So that is that. Now the other thing I wanted to show you here is, oops. I froze SWIS. Just like give it a second to load here. Let's go back to this year. There was a question earlier about, we were looking at those discipline disproportionality data, and we were looking at the likelihood that a student was referred. What we might be more concerned about is differences in suspension. I just wanted to show you how to do that. So what you can do here, I'll collapse that. You can go to action taken, and you may add out of school suspension and in school suspension. Oops. All right, so now we're going to just look at our suspensions, and we can now look at those same charts from before, the risk ratios, and the referrals by ethnicity. So again, we see when we just look at suspensions and not overall referrals, we still see some really significant differences in how students are being referred. All right, I'm going to pause real quick there, and then I want to show you one more before we move on. All right, one more report that schools I think tend to forget about in SWIS is the suspension report. So I wanted to pull that up, and again, we have some questions here, which we'll do real quick. So how many incidents of suspension have there been this year? If somebody were to ask you that, and if you're the SWIS person at your school, you could look. All right, so we have our start date, the beginning of school, end date right now. And I want to know how many incidents of suspension there have been. So I can look, and I can see that there's been 18 events, 18 suspension events. Right now, here's the weird thing when you look at that. So there's been 18 events and only 16.5 days of suspension. And the reason for that is SWIS allows you to enter a half day of suspension. So, now, I was at one point in my life a practicing school psychologist, and one thing that I needed to know is which of my students had been suspended. So I can also select show individual student data. And because this is fake data, I will select show names, which I would never do if this was real data. At least not on a webinar. Okay, and then I can see a list of who were those students, the 15 students that had been suspended. So when you're doing your team meetings and you're starting to look at students that may be at risk, that becomes a spot where you can do it. All right, and then I also may want to know, again, when I was a school psychologist, I had to keep a close eye on if any students with IEPs or with special education eligibility had been suspended. So I could select students currently with IEPs, and I can run that same report and see, all right, here are all the students that have an IEP that have been suspended. Here's the total for number of in-school events, total days for in-school, the number of out-of-school events, and the number of out-of-school days. And that's pretty helpful. And again, if you are responsible for supporting these students, you may also want to select them, and you can go to the student dashboard and look at just one kid. But before we do that, I'm going to go back to our suspension report here, and I'm going to ask you some questions. All right, the first question is how many incidents of suspension have there been this year? And I'm going to make that for all students. So just go ahead and in the chat, how many incidents of suspension have there been? And punch it into the chat. And then Angela. And then Angela, I think in response to your question is identify problems from students or the ways staff are dealing with discipline. Some combination probably of the two. We know that suspensions are harmful, so we want to do everything we can to reduce suspensions. Sometimes that means we have to teach students additional skills. Sometimes that means that we need to look at our own personal biases and the way we're responding, and sometimes we have to focus on prevention. All right, so it looks like everybody looked. So total, what did I ask? I don't remember. How many incidents of suspension have there been this year? And we could see 18 events of in-school, 14 events of out of school, so 32 if I'm doing my math correctly. All right, pretty cool report. And one last question, which student with an IEP has the most incidents of suspension? All right, so which student with an IEP has the most incidents of suspension? And that's going to tell us we need to intervene. So I'll go slow, so if you want to do this yourself, you can. I'm going to select students with IEPs, generate, and then most incidents of suspension. So we would look at events in school plus events out of school. It looks like there's a few students with 2. So no one student that's really standing out. All right. That is our pretty much our time here. I did want to just prompt you on a couple of things. One is if you're a school site that uses SWIS, one thing you're going to want to do right now is go to school settings and then school days and adjust your school days based on what's happening at your school. So it may be that you intended to have 19 days of school in April, but if you're like schools in my area, you had none. So if you were a SWIS school, you'd want to change that to reflect your correct data. All right, so that's it. I know it was fast, but again, what I would encourage you to do is download our HyperDoc here and There's videos on the ethnicity reports. There's the manual on the suspension report. And use those. And then Jackie asked to show where you can change the days, and I will show you again, no problem. So there's a bunch of different ways. We're going to go to school settings to change the number of days. So the way I like to go is I click on my school name here, and then come down here to school settings. And then I'm going to go to school days and click on 1920, and then you can adjust it or zero it out, and you'll hit save. Oh, and then Ada's got a question. Is there a way to look at staff behavior in SWIS? So if you have the appropriate permissions, you can look at referral patterns by adult. It is under additional reports, and there is a staff report that will tell you which staff are referring students. You can get to that and drill down as well. So that's kind of a cool way. All right, I know it's a little late. I went over. I want to thank everybody. There is a couple of quick reminders here at the end. Number one, there is a link to an evaluation, tinyurl.com CPC webinar eval, which you can get to. And then I do want to just prompt everybody. We normally, the California PBIS Coalition does a recognition system. That system did require folks to go to school sites, so we've changed it. It is now the California PBIS Community Cares for this year. And instead of using our traditional recognition system where we do the medals, the bronze, silver, gold, and platinum, any school that provides any evidence that they are supporting students during the COVID-19 pandemic will be acknowledged with the California Community Cares emblem. So go to pbisca.org, check it out. We're really hoping to honor as many schools as we can in this work, and we're doing our best to get out some of these examples to folks. So take a look at that. We're still collecting proposals for papers for our conference. We're hoping that things are going to get better soon here. Conference is in September, so submit for that. And then 2 cool upcoming webinars. There's a Tier 3 high school webinar my colleague Mark Alfaro is doing tomorrow. Check it out. And then Peter Stahl from Humboldt is doing a really cool one on how to be a trauma-informed behavior Jedi. If that doesn't intrigue you, I don't think anything will. All right, I'll let you go eat dinner. It's kind of early for dinner. Go play with your kids, read a book, take care of yourselves, stay indoors, wash your hands. Thank you all. Take care.